Hi, this is G from Native Speakers Academy, and welcome to another edition of the Education News Show. It's Friday, the 3rd of August 2012, and today, as usual, we're going to look at some news articles, comment, history, resources, opinion, and try to break down the stories to uncover the agendas that are racing through the systems that surround us in our everyday life. If you want more information about Native Speakers Academy, then you can visit our NSA-Slovakia homepage. We got a new story, bit of research up there on the homepage, which is Colors That Balance Life. It's looking at complementary medicine and the use of light in healing and also changing mental levels. If you want to take a little look through the stories and articles that are listed under that on the right side of our web page, it might be enlightening for you, to say the least. We're not going to spend time on that today though, but I just wanted to point you in the right direction. You'll even find that Peugeot have a new car with paint that changes color depending on your mood. If that isn't bizarre, then stick around, because we're gonna go deep down the rabbit hole of education. Our other main site is NSA-Education. If you take a quick look at that site, you'll find 3 sections of news and resources. We try to update it every 48 hours, so there'll be something new for you there each time you go, hopefully. Also, if you look down the left side, you will find a series of useful links that you might want to check out. All the main education links are there. I really want to draw your attention to the sites on the left side that are focusing on the work of John Holt, John Taylor Gatto, and Alfie Kohn. If you haven't done some research on those educators, then there's definitely something missing from your knowledge of education. I'd also recommend you check out the Unplugged Mum. I think, yeah, I got her link on the left side there. She does a radio show every week where she looks at the agendas within education and points out useful resources that can help homeschoolers. So that's a little bit of background information for you. We got a lot of stories to get through today, so we're going to dive right in. If you want more information about these stories are all linked right up on our NSA education page. Don't forget, we've also got a YouTube and Facebook, and use any general search engine, Yahoo, Start Page, Google, and you'll find information about us for sure. So, diving in, our first article that I'd like to look at today is Corrupted by Hollywood Sex Scenes. Psychologists concluded that teenagers exposed to more sex on screen in popular films are likely to have sexual relations with more people without using condoms. Well, there's a shock. Monkey see, monkey do. The study, based on nearly 700 popular films, found that watching love scenes could fundamentally influence a teenager's personality. Keywords: fundamentally influence. Notice how graphic scenes of sex and violence have increased in films. I even saw a recent piece of research which said that violence in Disney films has also gradually been increasing over the last 30 or 40 years. So the article continues. The researchers from Dartmouth College in New Hampshire concluded youngsters were more prone to take risks in their future relationships after watching those Hollywood scenes. They also concluded that for every hour of exposure to sexual content on screen, participants were more than 5 times likely to lose their virginity within 6 years. I wonder how they got this information. Adolescents who are exposed to more sexual content in movies start having sex at younger ages and have more sexual partners and are less likely to use condoms with casual sexual partners and are less likely to form long-term relationships. I added that last part. See the work of Bertrand Russell. And this was said by Dr. Ross O'Hara, who led the study. Now, if you follow the link on our page, you'll find that the study, or information about the study, was printed in the Telegraph, British daily newspaper. Printed right under a steamy scene from the film American Beauty. Let's continue. Actually, it's interesting how these articles paste in the middle links to other related articles published by the same newspaper, because we've got bang here in the middle other stories related to this, which include, and I'm not going to read these stories, but you can find them on the Telegraph, include 12-year-old rapes girl after watching porn, girls 13 given contraceptive, oh my god, can't speak again today, implants at school, and even another story that Emanuela Orlandi was kidnapped for sex parties for the Vatican police. Yeah, if you want to just dive headfirst down the rabbit hole and you want to see how far it goes, then you just want to search out those terms. But we're not dealing with that today. We're just touching the tip of the iceberg. Anyhow, the article continues. This study and its confluence with other work strongly suggests that parents need to restrict their children from seeing sexual content in movies at young ages. I would include violent content as well. The team reporting in Psychological Science studied 1,228 children aged between 12 and 14 and then analysed their sexual behaviour 6 years later. And I'm smiling because I'm just trying to wonder who would want to be involved in that kind of study and what kind of parents would want their children to be involved. Even if the parents knew, I imagine they might have done it without their permission. Each teenager identified which popular films of differing classifications they had seen from a random list of 50. 6 years later, they were asked how old they were when they became sexually active, how many partners they had, and how risky their sexual behaviour was. What kind of question is that for a teenager? How risky is your sexual behaviour? I guess for some it's an important question. They were also asked whether they used condoms. These findings provide a link between exposure to sex on screen and sexual behaviour. Participants also said they tried to mimic love scenes they had seen on screen in the real world. Does art imitate life, or does life imitate art? Answers on a postcard, or an email, or an e-card. The researchers also assessed the sexual content of 684 of the biggest grossing films released between 1998 and 2004. They found some of the most popular films from that time included scenes of a sexual nature, ranging from sexual scenes to heavy kissing. Films with the most sexual content, and it goes on to list films and a number of seconds of sexual content. Even children's films were found to have sexual content, such as the G-rated Princess Diaries, which contained 42 seconds of that. It's somebody's job to sit and watch all these and time the sex scenes. That's pretty freaky, really. Most of the films did not portray safe sex. Of course they didn't. You can't have someone just stopping to say, oh, just wait a second, I'm just going to... there we go. You can fill in the blanks. Dr. O'Hara said that the combination of sexually explicit films and adolescents had a profound impact on their behaviour. And remember, they'll be told, oh, they're just films. Well, perhaps there's more to that than meets the eye. You can find a link to that article on our web page. Something running along similar lines is our next article, which has the title, What in the World is Wrong with American Kids? What in the world has happened to the children of America? All over the United States, kids are acting like half-crazed monsters, but most people seem to think that's normal. American kids today are selfish, self-centered, sadistic, cruel, disrespectful, disobedient, ungrateful, boastful, unforgiving, brutal, and they possess very little self-control whatsoever. I wouldn't say they're all like that. They feel entitled to everything, but they don't want to work for any of it. That reminds me of something. Like communism. They are absolutely addicted to entertainment, and they know very little about self-sacrifice. I think you can't really include all children in this category, but I'm sure you could find large numbers that fit into it. Disciplining children is not considered to be politically correct in America today. And with each passing year, everything gets worse. So what in the world is America going to look like when all of these out of control children grow up? Following the link will take you to the American Dream, where they've listed a series of recent news stories and a few videos as well, showing how graphically brutal childhood has become. Brutal and institutionalized, I would say. The childhood has become for so many children, and it's really sad. One video, described as incredibly shocking, showed a group of school kids taunting an elderly school bus monitor so ruthlessly that she broke down into tears. It's time to face reality, the article reads. American kids are really messed up. This is one of the reasons I'm encouraging parents, to get their children out of the government schools. The article continues. I went to public schools all my life, and they were horrible enough back then. Sadly, there are endless examples of how out of control American children are these days. For example, teens all over America are now playing something called the knockout game. The idea is you pick a random stranger on the street, then you see if you can run over and knock that person out. That's pretty shocking, really. Recent articles include 3 teenagers accused of killing a 62-year-old father of 12 in West Rogers Park, where they were playing a game called Pick Him Out and Knock Him Down. And so it continues. Our country is becoming sick and twisted in some areas, I would add. Meanwhile, children are becoming increasingly stupid at the same time. For example, according to a survey conducted by the National Geographic Society, only 37% of all Americans between the ages of 18 and 24 can find the nation of Iraq on a map. And I recently saw a video where somebody thought that Hungary wasn't actually a country. In fact, they thought the European Union was a country, and politically, I guess you could look at it like that. The article continues. Sadly, there are many other surveys that show how stupid kids have become. And there's a series here of amazing results of a study conducted a few years ago by an organization called Common Core. 43% of US high school students, only 43%, knew the Civil War was fought sometime between 1850 and 1900. Only 60% of the students knew World War I was fought sometime between 1900 and 1950. And it goes on to list a series of ridiculous percentages. Only 23% knew who the first president was of the United States. And my experience of living out here in the wild wilderness of Slovakia is that most Slovak school children know more about British and American history than British children and American children. And you can only really understand this if you spend some time outside of Britain or America and look from the outside in to try to gauge what's happening in the situation. Kids in America are in a total mess. Not only are they stupid and violent, they're also sexually active. 47% of high school students have had sex. US has the highest teen pregnancy rate on the planet. That could be seen as positive or negative depending upon your perspective. More shocking is that 1 out of every 4 teen girls has had at least one sexually transmitted disease. And there's no cure for some of those diseases. In a survey of teen girls done by Tyra Banks, on average, girls lose their virginity at the age of 15. 14% of teens who say they are having sex are doing it at school. 52% say they don't use protection. 1 in 3 girls say she fears having a disease, and so on and so on. Statistics for boys show that boys are actually not doing any better, and on and on and on. Well, what is the point? The point is that history repeats itself, and human beings are creatures of habits. You begin these habits at a younger age. It's very difficult to shake them off, and what happens is, as is pointed out later in that article, that only 51% of Americans over the age of 18 are married, whereas if you look back to 1960 it was 72%. It might be happening slowly by 1% per year, but even though it tiptoes, it's still clear that society is falling apart. The United States has the highest divorce rate in the world by a very wide margin. It also has the highest number of one-person households on the entire planet. America, wake up. The families are weak and getting weaker, and the children are suffering. It's time to move on to another story. You'll also find this on our NSA education page. The title is, "What if public schools were abolished?" In American culture, public schools are praised in public and criticized in private, which is roughly the opposite of how we tend to treat large-scale enterprises like Walmart, for example. In public, everyone says that Walmart is awful, filled with shoddy foreign products and exploiting workers, and growing uncontrollably, I would add. But in private, we buy the well-priced quality goods, and long lines of people hope to be hired, especially in an economic downturn, or just downfall, I guess we could call the present situation. The article continues, why is this? It has something to do with the fact that public schools are part of our civic religion. The primary evidence that people cite to show the local government serves us, and there is a psychological element. Most of us turn our kids over to them, so surely that they must have our best interest at heart. But do we really understand what that means? Whose best interest is at heart? This article is out of the Ludwig von Mises Institute, Advancing the Scholarship of Liberty in the Tradition of the Austrian School, supporting economists everywhere. The article continues, Murray and Rothbard's Education, Free and Compulsory, explains that the true origin and purpose of public education is not so much education as we think of it, but indoctrination in the civic religion. This explains why the civic elite is so suspicious of homeschooling and private schooling. It's not fear of low test scores that is driving this, but the worry that these kids aren't learning the values that the state considers important. I'm not sure the values that the state considers are important for the individual from that perspective. But in a free society, let's allow everyone their perspective. But to blast public schools is not the purpose of this article. There are decent public schools, I agree, and terrible ones, I wholeheartedly agree. So there is no use generalizing, nor is there a need to trot out data on test scores. Let's just deal with the economics. All studies have shown that average cost per pupil for public school is twice that of private schools. Here's a sample study. And the article contains a link to the Universal Tuition Tax Credit document from the Mackinac Center report, a proposal to advance parental choice in education. That's slightly dated, November 1997, but well worth a browse through. The link will be posted. It's also well true that the best education costs nothing, and that's something they don't really want to tell you as well. Article continues. This runs contrary to intuition, since people think of public schools as free and private schools as expensive. Remember, nothing the government does is for free. But once you consider the source of funding, tax dollars, the private alternative is much cheaper. In fact, public schools cost as much as the most expensive and elite private schools in the country. The difference is that the cost of public schooling is spread out over the entire population, whereas the private school cost is borne only by the families with students who attend them, by the families who have enough money to send their students there, and a few excellent students who achieve sponsorship or get grants. In short, if we could abolish public schools and compulsory schooling laws and replace it all with market-provided education, we would have better schools at half the price and be freer too. We would also be a more just society with only the customers of education bearing the costs. And essentially, I agree with the fact that the customer should bear the cost. It should be a customer-orientated market. Giving governments a monopoly has never really led to anything except further government monopoly. What's not to like? Well, there is the problem of the transition. There are obvious and grave political difficulties. We might say that public education enjoys a political advantage here due to network effects. A significant number of subscriptions, etc., have been piled up in the status quo, and it's very difficult to change thus. But let's pretend. Let's say that a single town decided that the costs of public schooling are too vast relative to private schooling, and the city council decided to abolish public schools outright. The first thing to notice is that this would be illegal, since every state requires localities to provide education on a public basis. What a wonderful catch-22 situation. I don't know what would happen to the city council. Would they be jailed? Who knows? Certainly they would be sued. And probably by the poor people, who ironically would benefit most from the change. But let's say we somehow get past that problem thanks to, say, a special amendment in the state constitution that exempts certain localities if the city council approves. Then there's the problem of federal legislation and regulation. I am purely speculating since I don't know the relevant laws, but we can guess that the Department of Education would take notice. Of course they would. And a national hysteria of some sort would follow. Oh my God, it would be bad for the teachers and the students and the parents. You can imagine they would drum in the unions as well. But let's say we miraculously get past this. I like this. This is from an economics webpage, and they just imagine they can get past all of these hurdles. Let's say we miraculously get past that problem too, and the federal government lets this locality go its own way. There will be two stages in the transition. The first stage in the first stage, many seemingly bad things will happen. How are the physical buildings handled, for example? Are they sold to the highest bidder? Who will be the new school owners, businesses or housing developers? You also need to take care that they don't fall too much into private hands. For example, banks and large corporations dictating what happens within the schools, because then you're perhaps caught in a school to work trap as well. The article continues, you can imagine the outcry, but it really is something that we could think about as a possible alternative to the system we have at the moment. Why not let some people go their own way, stand back and see what happens? If it works, people will be attracted to it. If it doesn't, nothing is lost to these people. Absolutely nothing is lost. It's not going to be so catastrophic for sure. All I intended to do by reading this part of the article was just introduce you to the topic, the principle and the concept. What if public schools were abolished? Would it be so bad? Could they survive economically? Would they be even allowed the opportunity to survive? You can find more information by reading that article, and you'll find a link to it on our web page. Moving on, because there's more, there's always more. In the information age, there's very often too much more. The next article has the title, Social Deprivation Has a Measurable Effect. Researchers led by Margaret Sheridan, PhD, and Charles Nelson, PhD, of the Labs of Cognitive Neuroscience at Boston Children's Hospital analyzed brain MRI scans from Romanian children in the ongoing Bucharest Early Intervention Project, which has transferred some children reared in orphanage into quality foster care homes. I wonder if there really is quality foster care. From my experience, it varies from bad to worse. Children should be with their parents wherever possible, and I don't mean professional parents. I found that idea repugnant. Anyway, the report continues. Their findings, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, early edition, online the week of the 23rd of July, add to earlier studies by Nelson and colleagues showing cognitive impairment in institutionalized children, but also showing improvements when children are placed in good foster homes. It's horrifying in the modern world that any children should be placed, or even have to be placed, in an institution. Even more horrible that government should be picking up the pieces of that. Increasingly, we are finding evidence that exposure to childhood adversity has a negative effect on brain development, has a negative effect on all development, I would add. The implications are wide-ranging, not just for institutionalized children, but also for children exposed to abuse, abandonment, violence, war, poverty, and other adversaries. And this article comes out of medicalexpress.com. So what's happening? Well, these researchers compared three groups of 8 to 11-year-old children, 29 who had been reared in an institution, 25 who were selected at random to leave the institution for high-quality foster care placement, and 20 typically developing children who were never in an institution. The children in the middle group had been in foster care for 6 to 9 years. On the MRI, children with histories of any institutional rearing had significantly smaller grey matter volumes in the cortex of the brain than never institutionalized children, even if they had been placed in foster care. Children who remained in institutional care had significantly reduced white matter volume as compared with those never institutionalized, And for children who had been placed in foster care, white matter volume was indistinguishable from that of children who were never institutionalized. Says me as I bang the microphone trying to scratch my nose. Sorry about that. But I've got sweat. I was just gonna tell you, I got sweat running down my face because it's hotter than hell outside, and even though I got the fan turned on full behind me, you just can't stop sweating in an office on a day like this. But what's the point? The point is that the children's brains are not developing fully, basically. That institutionalized children's brains tend to misfire, I guess we could call it, malfunction, and just not develop as we would expect a child's brain to develop. I've also seen studies where it has shown that the level of activity in the brain is almost zero when children are sitting in the class during lessons, because the brain is not being creative and allowed to follow through natural processes. Not that all classes are bad, but it's something that scientifically we can use to show that a lot of forms of education and care are just not working for the children. White matter, basically, the article continues, which forms the information superhighway of the brain, shows some evidence of catch-up. These differences in brain structure appear to account for previously observed but unexplained differences in brain function. Our cognitive studies suggest there may be a sensitive period spanning the first 2 years of life, within which the onset of foster care exerts a maximal effect on cognitive development. The younger a child is when placed in foster care, the better the outcome, according to this. Your opinion about it is your opinion. There are facts streaming in from different sides about the positives and negatives of foster care for children. I would like to see, as I said before, children at home with their families. I'll read one more little extract from the article. At least 8 million children worldwide live in institutional settings. 8 million children worldwide, according to UNICEF. Child poverty is increasing. I know from other statistics that around 25% of British children live below the poverty line, which is quite shocking. It would be nice to see some wealth redistributed for their benefit. So 8 million children worldwide live in institutional settings, exposing them to severe psychological and physical neglect. In most institutional settings, the ratio of caregivers to children is 1 to 12, very low. Previous studies have documented many deficits in cognitive function, language and social function, an increase in stereotypes, markedly elevated rates of attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, difficulties with social functioning, and even premature cellular aging. It's shocking what's happening to the children's brains, and they just then don't develop the skills they need to deal with this themselves as they grow up and branch out in life, if they're lucky enough to get that far, that is. The next article that I would like to draw your attention to has the title Institutional Infantilization. There's a nice bit of alliteration. A bunch of college students have gotten themselves in trouble lately by abusing their credit cards. Not all college students, mind you, not even a majority of them. Although I could add that I vastly overspent my budget when I was a student. Sorry, Mum and Dad. I apologise for that. Bit late, but never mind. But Congress believes it must step in to protect all these young people from themselves and those nasty predatory credit card companies that seem to be dead set on ensnaring these youngsters into a lifetime of paying off debt. If these children would just learn to read contracts and control their purchasing impulses, there would be a lot less of a problem to begin with. Yeah, it's not just a problem for children, is it? There is just another case of how the members of Congress seem to consider that all we regular citizens are a bunch of idiotic infants and they must take care of us, of course, by taking care of everybody instead of letting them grow up and take responsibility for their own lives. They extend childhood and induce the spread of rampant immaturity. I agree. I consider this a form of institutional infantilization. Any grown-up knows that forcing children to do something is easier most of the time than trying to force independent-minded adults, so it would be easier for our benevolent government officials if we were all, at least emotionally and mentally, a bunch of helpless babies. Wouldn't they just love that? And this article comes out of the blog spot Musing on Our Times with the Old Grey Ghost. Subtitled, A Repository of Sardonic Social Commentary with a Satirical Critique of that Political Comedy of Errors commonly referred to as government. The article continues. There's also a great deal of hypocrisy in this whole matter on the actions of Congress. In the past, high school administrators and college boards of regents, at the request and behest of parents of students in their care, tried to ban a real group of predators that would try to influence the students into making a decision that could ruin their whole lives, if not drastically shorten them in a violent manner. This example would be military recruiters. And remember that I pointed out in the last few weeks that the British government has suggested bringing in the military into schools to help children with their discipline. There's a bad idea if ever I heard one. You can take that and put it where the sun doesn't shine. Members of Congress were incensed that anyone who had been charged with the care and protection of someone else's child would dare try to protect their young wards from military recruiters, who would have unfettered access to influencing these inexperienced souls into making these life and death decisions. If war is so good, Congress should go off and fight it, in my opinion. There's a big door I've just opened up. Never mind. They threatened to remove any federal... I'd like to see how many of government's children are on the front line. They threatened to remove any federal funding and grants to such institutions, and desperately needing the money, these institutions broke down and allowed the recruiters back into their respective campuses. Oh, that's the last thing you need, isn't it? The military roaming around your campus, searching for lost souls to give a purpose to. One has to remember that when one becomes locked into the teat of the federal sow, she starts making all the decisions about when you're going and how far. Sorry, that should be where you're going and how far. Yes, it does work like that, doesn't it? I advise you to check and see whether or not your churches are in any way connected with the government. I think you might be surprised. Last paragraph. So the federal government isn't really trying to protect our young people from a life of enslavement due to insurmountable debt. When it comes to enslaving people, the government is the expert. It's just trying to get rid of any competition. That, of course, is comment, but it has interesting base in operational facts. Time flies. Let's move. And the next article, I hope we've got time to get through this, is why we operate the way we do. I don't know about you, but I've caught myself a few times wondering why I do things the way I do things. The only way to find an answer to that is to try to turn back the clock in your mind and see how things began, I guess. The article reads, A woman was teaching her daughter to make a roast one day when her daughter asked, Mom, why do you cut the ends off the roast? The mother wasn't quite sure how to respond, but thought back to what her mother used to do which is where she learned it in the first place. Not knowing the real reason why her mother would cut the ends off the roast, she decided to call her mother, which was the daughter's grandma, of course. "Hey Mom, remember when you used to make the roast when I was a kid and you would always cut the ends off?" "Why did you cut the ends off?" The woman's mother responded, "I'm not sure. That's just how my mother always used to do it." And this is where the story turns a little bit magical, because luckily the grandmother's mother was still alive and she was able to call her to find out the question the three of them had wanted to get answered. When Grandma's mother answered the phone, Grandma asked, "Mum, why did you cut the ends off the roasts when you used to make it?" "Well, because the ovens were smaller back then, and so were the pans, and if we didn't cut them off, they wouldn't fit." Simple answer to a simple question, really. So what do we take away from this story? 3 generations of people were learning to cut the ends off the roast because that's how it was done in the past, and none of them ever questioned why it was done. And I guess it's that question why that's really the important question. This article, I should say, is coming to you from the collectiveevolution.com webpage. Let's continue. Even though the reason for cutting had become obsolete, the same method was still being perpetuated simply because they thought that's how it's done. You see, much like things we do now, in the past it served a purpose to cut the ends off, but after those methods became wasteful, well, those habits stuck around. Truly examine what we do in this world, how we make decisions, how things seem like they're on autopilot all the time. Do you feel like you're on autopilot? Are you consciously thinking about what you're doing? Have you turned off, tuned out because you feel you can't make a difference? Well, you may quickly notice that everything we do is based on repeating things we have done in the past. Often, I added that, without questioning whether or not it can be done differently. Based on what I've found, not only could we be living in a world where we operate in a completely harmonious way with our planet, but we can also end all suffering within ourselves if we only looked past the beliefs of how things need to be. You would likely be shocked to find out how many mainstream common beliefs are completely false when you look into them. This includes things we learn in school about science, evolution, technology, our environment, our health, and I would add even our family and ourselves. We simply perpetuate beliefs and theories that very often we are afraid, and very often we still need to update. And that's something to think about. Do you need to update anything within your world, within your life? Well, sometimes the old traditions are good traditions. Let us not forget where we came from. Let us not forget who we were. Let us not forget how we came to be where we are today. I have another article, but I'm not going to go into it because I've covered it before, and I don't want to finish on something negative. So I'm going to finish with a thought that if you haven't contacted any of your older relatives recently, if you know them, if you're still in touch with them, just perhaps you can find time to pick up the phone, give them a call, get on the net, write them an email, ask someone how they're doing, because as we live in life, to truly live, we need to branch out, and one of those branches is the contact that we have with our family and our older members of our family. So if you haven't had much time today to think about them, just spare a second, just spare a thought, and perhaps you can share a little bit of time with them if they're still around, because I know that it's very important for my son to spend time with his grandparents right now, and I'm really sad that I couldn't spend more time with my grandparents as they've passed on, hopefully to a better place. So that's my thought for the day. You can find a lot more stories on our NSA Education website. That's NSA-Education. Or you can visit our homepage, NSA-Slovakia. You can visit our YouTube page. You can find us on Facebook under Native Speakers Academy. You can also find me on Facebook if you want to leave a message for me. I will try to answer any questions and get back to you. It's been really enjoyable sharing this information with you today. I hope that I've given you something to think about, and I hope you've been enlightened by one or two of the ideas. It was a little bit heavy and deeper than I wanted to get into things today, so hopefully I'll be able to choose a few lighter topics for you next time. So from the sweltering summer heat of middle Slovakia, I wish you a great week and weekend, and I'll be back with another education news show quite soon. Take care, everyone.